Thank you for the warm welcome. It's a real privilege and honour to be given the opportunity to talk today. Dan and I are not really going to talk about a magic ingredient or a technology innovation, but we're going to talk about this thing called lean, which is actually decades old, and we believe our innovation is about how we apply that to farming and agriculture. We've heard a lot today, and I think yesterday, about how there's lots of challenges for the sector and how it needs to adapt, it needs to be more agile, it needs to change to lots of different things. And again, the previous speakers spoke about some of those challenges as well. But we want to bring this back down to the farm level and talk about how we can use some of these techniques from lean to help actually farms make those improvements and be more adaptive and reactive. We also don't believe that farmers every day get up to think that they're not going to be efficient today or they're going to do a bad job. Most people are doing the best job they can in the circumstances, so these tools and techniques are there just to help people improve. I'm going to first talk about where this came from and why there's some similarities to potentially where the sector is at the moment. So lean came from post-war Japan. So a long time ago, where Japan came out of the war with a real lack of resource in terms of labor, in terms of people, in terms of materials, all of those things really lacked that resource. So it had to think carefully about how it could make sure that it uses that resource in an efficient way. Also at the time, the prevalent system for manufacturing was something called mass production. So this was most people heard of how Ford were making Model T Fords. They made one and it was the same color, and that was mass production. And mass production was good at making that one single product, but it wasn't good at being able to adapt to customer choice, and it was slow to flex and react to changes, very slow and very steady. Also, the people who worked in those places really disliked it. They disliked the repetitiveness. They disliked the command and control structures. So what happened is Japanese manufacturing, particularly in automotive, started to outperform the Western manufacturing techniques and mass production quite considerably. So the Western manufacturer went over and tried to study, well, why was that? We believe there's some parallels with farming today, and I think, again, the previous speakers spoke about just doing more and more of the same going forward to deal with the challenges is maybe not the best way forward. And also, we have some scarcity of resources as well, in terms of labor, in terms of material, in terms of water, nutrients, and customers are changing rapidly as well, and their requirements and their demands are becoming more and more. So, we're trying to challenge this feeling of just mass production, of building more and more of the same thing and thinking about it in a different way. So let me talk a bit about lean and what it is. So lean is a structured approach, but the solutions are bespoke. So it's very structured in its application, but every farm is different, every business is different. Every issue and opportunity is different, every system is different, and therefore every improvement will be different as well. So we won't be talking about particular improvements that we have seen when we've been applying these techniques, but we're instead going to talk about the structured approach. So first of all, lean is guided by a set of very defined principles that give a roadmap to how it should be implemented, and it guides it through its implementation as well. It's then supported by numerous models, tools, techniques, templates, a whole myriad of them. But in broad terms, it does three things. It really helps the business focus. It really helps farmers focus on what's important to the customer and therefore see issues and opportunities for improvement. It then takes those issues and opportunities of improvement and takes some structure through how they can become realized to actually the benefit and the improvement being delivered. Finally, continuous improvement and that small incremental change are those things that farmers and businesses can continue to do on a day-to-day basis. So it takes those tools and puts them into the system of how we work and manage on a day-to-day basis. Our implementation of Lean is upskilling rather than telling. So we are trying to support farmers to learn these tools and techniques and learn these principles, rather than just advise or tell them the solutions. So enabling them to develop and implement their own solutions and their own improvements with their extended team. And not surprisingly, those things are far more likely to sustain and to stick when the teams and the farmers have their own improvements and solutions.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about what that journey might look like for an individual farm and how we've gone about trying to do these things. And the first thing we start with is Lego. The reason we start with a little bit of Lego and why a single selection of blocks put together in a very precise way is actually quite an educational tool is because it gives us the ability to remove ourselves from a context we know so well. When we just are so close to our own businesses, it's really hard to be able to take the step back to see another way of doing things, to avoid all those biases that Jack just mentioned, all those conformational biases that we know from years and years of doing this, from generationals, from peer learning. So we have the opportunity to be able to learn something new in an actual safe space. We're playing with Lego. I'm not challenging you on how you farm. We're just playing with Lego. That enables delegates to kind of learn about some things which then they can take back and apply to their own businesses in their own context. And we use this out-of-context learning right the way through the programme because it's so valuable that everyone here who knows so much about farming and could teach me a heck of a lot about farming, we don't know a lot about lots of other things that have been through similar challenges, like the automotive industry. So the first part of this is really challenging ourselves to understand what is value in the business. And the best part is we can answer all the answers we like, but we don't decide it. The customer ultimately decides what is value. And our customer demands are changing. So this is how I've done it, will no longer serve purpose because the customers have moved on. We do not determine value. And when you start to think of what could that value be in the business, what really am I doing and what is my customer paying for? We can identify the value, then we can start to identify what is it that generates value. What are the things that are generating value in the processes that generate value in my business? Because that is what we should focus on. Everything else is non-value add. And if it's non-value add, it's waste. And we don't like waste. We keep telling people to be more efficient. So we have to identify the waste. When we start to understand what we're trying to measure, and on a dairy farm, you might think your primary value is just milk production. What we actually can subdivide that down to is what are my value generators in a dairy farm? The cows. Yeah, okay, this makes sense. This isn't world leading, or you don't need to write all this bit down. But it's amazing how many of our business processes don't align with actually allowing cows, or you can take this into other species, to actually perform. So a cow's job, for example, is to take feed, highly nutritious, take it, go and lie down, hopefully, and turn it into milk. And yet on most of the farms I work on, we restrict feed space. We restrict access to the raw material we want them to transform. And yet we start trying to do other things instead. But if we just measure things by averages or outputs, then we don't see the picture. We've measured some things for so long, and it's done absolutely nothing. And it's easy to stand here and be critical, so I'm going to do it. We look at lameness. We've measured it. We've run so many different programs, and we know there's between 25 and 33% of the national herd on an every given day is lame. That's a phenomenal waste. I wouldn't be concentrating on new technologies to do something better when we have this glaring omission that faces us, but we have to be able to see it. And we want to look at the distribution of data. We don't just want to look at points. We want to identify where is this variation coming from. The variation in outputs is because of a variation in inputs. So let's start measuring the right things. Lots of people can tell me their milk production and bits and pieces like that, but they can't tell me how long the cows lie down for in a day. When a cow lies down, she makes milk at 140% of the rate of the time when she's standing up. If you saw that in a factory as a productivity thing, people would be sitting down. They'd be in comfy chairs. Yet we look for the cheapest mattress. So once you start to be able to look at the data and decide what the value generation is, we can identify the waste. And once we've found the areas to focus on, we have to start creating flow. Creating flow is the removal of waste out of the process to allow the value generation to occur. And it's easy to say, and this is why the standardized approach actually involves quite a bespoke set of outcomes, is you have to see the process. One of the rules in Lean is being at the gemba, seeing the process where it's happening. Because otherwise, we're not going to know what's going on. We're guessing. We're just providing people with guesses, and now we're in higher value businesses. They're higher value guesses. You roll the dice a few times, from experience, yeah, you might be right. But there are times you won't be. And we're getting to the point where businesses can't handle that from an investment point of view. The next point, which is a real key bit, is you've got to involve the people doing the process, because they're the people that know the process. Any top-down delivery of we're doing this because this process isn't working without actually understanding that, the answers are there. The answers are on the farm, in the team, and they're critical. And that's really important for actually also being able to get the engagement. And what we're trying to do by removing waste is standardize the outputs. People spend so much time and money on things like genetics because one animal is better than another. And yet we don't give them a fair benchmark to have a go at it. So you've got two genetically different cows that you're trying to compare, yet one of them has much better feed access than the other. You're not comparing genetics. You're putting all these investments into things like, I want a PLI. PLI is a 5-year process and the animal's dead at 3 years. It doesn't really work. So you have to remove these bits of waste and standardize before the next stage is even possible, before the investments work, before the performance ingredients, be it things like amino acids or targeted nutrition, be it the controversial feed additives that reduce methane. Everyone talks about, oh, you might get a 25% or 30% reduction in methane, but nobody talks about the number of animals and the quality of the animals that we actually feed. So we need to do that to be able to move on. And the real skill is not someone coming and telling you this is what's wrong with your farm. It's how do you get the people on the ground to see it? And that is the learning to see process. Because one thing I have noticed that is if you can help people see it, once they see it, it annoys them. They sort it. A lot of advisory services, and I work in an advisory principle work as well, in terms of a lot of advisory work is actually just unsolicited advice. And what do we do with unsolicited advice? We smile, we nod, and we do sweet. So we've got to be able to turn those skills, and this is where we get the opportunity to be able to use some of those tools and techniques. That standardized process of giving people the skills of problem solving. How do you problem solve? You also, when you get to those points and you start to put those things, that problem solving skills on the farm, you change the way advisory work and input of technology and new resources works, because you create what's called pull. The farms are now in a right place to actually start drawing expertise in. Pull is the principle of providing exactly what the customer needs, no more, no less, exactly when they need it. And we in farming have existed in push manufacturing, mass production. Put it out there, make it, deal with it. Deal with the consequences of oversupply, of undersupply. Ride the booms, ride the bust, just make it cheaper. When actually, if we were making exactly what was needed and exactly what the customer wanted, and instead of more, it was better, or exactly what was that point, then we avoid a heck of a lot of market volatility and we remove a lot of variation. So removing the waste earlier in the cycle allows us to actually be much more confident about the performance of the business that we're going to see, because we don't have these big changes, these big peaks and troughs. When I talk about push manufacturing, I think like most dairy herds or most animal agricultural business, we've got this much space, I'm going to fill it this many animals and see what comes out the other side. As opposed to an actual pull process would be, I am going to produce this much from my customer at this specification. Therefore, what resources do I need to make that? Because I don't want to carry more resource. More resource consumes resource, has environmental implications, has significant financial implications. So it's something we need to be very conscious of. And you can see this in lots of other parts of the business as well. When you take that down to replacements, most people generate some heifers and put them in the business at some point because they've got the heifers. And some productive animals have to leave, or problems don't get dealt with. Broken cows are tolerable because we have the inventory. when we shouldn't. We should know exactly what we need to do. You can take it down to micro levels as well, like nutrition. Instead of trying to pile all these fancy additives into animals to make them perform better, remove the blockers. And then animals will draw the requirements that they need, be it targeted amino acids or similar things. And what we can do in this process is, like, by upskilling and actually putting those skills onto the farm, what we're trying to do is give the farm the ability to continuously improve, to have the visuals, to be able to see these 1% aggregate improvements, these tiny little culture changes that go one by one by one by one that lead to a substantially different reality than just waiting for what that next big thing should be. And we build that business resilience is going to come down to how quickly can businesses go through this plan, do, check, act cycle. And so by transferring those skills onto farms and upskilling farms and the people doing the work, you enable the decision-making to be much closer to the point of action. And that is something, if you look into other industries, is absolutely critical. Military is a fantastic example of this, actually, is that military doctrine has moved to the point of being able to move decision-making exactly to the point it's needed. If you have to refer a decision back to an advisory team to these skills, you're slow, you're outdone, you're out of date. So we need to transfer those skills through. And that will do for me.
So Dan actually took us through the lean principles. It's like we kind of designed it that way. So there are 5 lean principles, and Dan just went through those through the slides. So the first being really being clear about what is the value in the eyes of the customer. I should say this was a group of 2 people called Womack and Jones who wrote a book called Lean Thinking in the 90s where they studied Japanese manufacturing, and they pulled out these principles as what guides Japanese manufacturing. So, value in the eyes of the customer. Really, really clear about what the customer wants. Understand that value stream. So how does the value get added within a business or within a supply chain? Right from the start, right to the finish, where is the value? Once we understand the value and can see it in the value stream and see the steps, we then want to try and bring those steps, those value things closer together and remove everything else to make the value flow. Dan then talked about pull. Pull is about making sure we're making it to the customer demand. Are we supplying what the customer wants when they want it? We traditionally, in Western manufacturing and automotive, we used to push things. So those who are old enough would probably remember there used to be lots of cars on airfields waiting for someone to buy them. Whereas nowadays, when you purchase a car, it's often made to order. And finally, seeking perfection. So again, previous speaker spoke about this. It's about making these small incremental changes towards perfection. But it's also recognizing that perfection can change, that end goal can change. So rather than making big steps, it's lots of small incremental steps. So to give this a bit of reality of what we've actually done, we've been working with the Leprino on a lean program. We're on our 4th cohort of dairy farms. Each cohort has about 10 farms on it. So the program is focused for the farms on, can we make them more profitable? Can we help them find savings? Can we help them find improvements? For Leprino, that gives the benefit of an environmental improvement and a carbon reduction. But that's not our focus on the farm. So if we make farms more efficient, it will also translate to carbon reduction as well. So each program is 4 events. The farms come together as one, and we go through things, the training, so they get to play with a Lego for a bit to demonstrate out of context how do these tools and principles apply. We then take those tools and principles onto the farm to work on their particular opportunities and their particular improvements. So some of the results up on that right-hand side. The year-on-year efficiency improvements range from 4 to 8% for the farms, and on average, £130,000 per farm. But there's a large range of that because there's lots of different farms and lots of different systems. The reduction in carbon is between 3 and 10%. Actually, for the farms that started this program, they're now reporting figures like 26%. And there's been a 10-to-1 return for Leprino. So, really our technique helps the farms become more profitable, helps the supply chain reduce its carbon impact, and also for the dairy cow, by releasing some of the constraints in the system, it helps with their welfare. Thank you for listening to us.